It was 9 p.m. amidst the clinking crystal and suffocating perfume of the Sterling Gala. Maria Bland, exhausted from balancing a struggling business and single motherhood, just wanted to survive the final course of the night. Instead, she got a billionaire in a $1,000 tuxedo standing exactly where she needed to step. As her heel caught the hem of her apron, the tray tilted and flaming brandy surged forward like a tidal wave. Whoosh! The sound of the ignite echoed through the ballroom like a flare. She expected a lawsuit. She expected the end of her career. Instead, Roger Smith, the alpha king of the West, didn't even flinch as the fire licked his chest. He reached up, gripped the collar of his scorched silk shirt, and ripped it down the middle, exposing a torso of hard muscle and ancient silver scars. He looked at her with amber eyes that glowed with a terrifying, predatory heat and whispered the words that would set her soul on fire. "Careful, sweetheart. Now I'm really hot for you." And he didn't mean he was angry. He meant he had just found his mate and he was never letting her go. Welcome back to the pack and a huge hello to our new listeners here at Anne's Romance. If you're ready for a story where the sparks literally fly and the alpha is as protective as he is dangerous, you are in the right place. If you love possessive kings and women who aren't afraid to play with fire, please smash that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a single chapter of Maria and Roger's journey. I want to see how far our fire spreads. Drop your best emoji in the comments or tell me which city you're listening from. Let's see who's part of the Alpha King's new pack today. The Sterling Gala was a sea of shimmering silk and suffocating ego, the kind of place where a single scuff on a mahogany floor felt like a federal crime. Maria Bland adjusted her grip on the heavy silver tray, her muscles screaming after 6 hours on her feet. She just needed to clear the final course, the cherries jubilee, and then she could slip away to the tiny apartment where her twins were hopefully asleep. The blue flames of the brandy danced atop the cherries, casting a spectral glow over her tired face. She was navigating the narrow gap between a towering ice sculpture and the VIP table when the world decided to tilt. A drunken socialite stepped backward without looking, her stiletto catching the hem of Maria's catering apron. Maria's heart lurched into her throat. Time slowed to a crawl. She felt the tray tip, the weight shifting beyond the point of no return. With a desperate gasp, she watched a tidal wave of flaming alcohol and scorched fruit sail through the air. It didn't hit the floor. It hit the broad, expensive chest of the man standing at the head of the table. The ballroom fell into a deafening, horrified silence. Roger Smith, the billionaire mogul whose reputation for ruthlessness was as sharp as his jawline, stood encased in a flickering blue halo of fire. Maria stood frozen, her empty tray clattering to the marble floor like a gunshot. "Oh God," she whispered, her vision swimming. "I'm so sorry, She expected him to scream. She expected his security team to tackle her. Instead, Roger Smith did something that made the air in the room vanish. He reached up with large, steady hands and gripped the collar of his ruined $1,000 white silk shirt. With a single violent jerk, he ripped the fabric down the center. Buttons skittered across the floor like hail. He didn't have the body of a businessman. His chest was a landscape of hard-packed muscle and silvered, jagged scars that looked more like battle trophies than surgical marks. The blue flames flickered out against his skin, leaving him unbothered as if he were made of the fire itself. Roger stepped over the mess, closing the distance until Maria was trapped between his heat and the cold ice sculpture. He didn't look angry, he looked hungry. His eyes, usually a cold gray, had bled into a molten predatory amber that seemed to track the pulse jumping in her neck. He leaned down, his shadow swallowing her whole. The scent of wood smoke and something wilder, something primal, hit her senses. He ignored the gasping crowd and the frantic whispers of his assistants. Instead, he let his gaze linger on her trembling lips before a dark, wicked smirk pulled at his mouth. "Careful, sweetheart," he rumbled, his voice a low, vibrating growl that settled deep in her bones. "Now I'm really hot for you." He didn't look like a man who wanted an apology. He looked like a king who had just found something he intended to keep. The smell of burnt sugar and cheap floor cleaner was a far cry from the expensive wood smoke and amber that had haunted Maria's dreams all night. She stood in the cramped kitchen of her small apartment, her hands trembling as she packed the girls' lunchboxes. The local news was already buzzing about the gala fire, and every time a notification chimed on her phone she jumped, half expecting a process server or a squad of high-priced lawyers to break down her door. The knock came at exactly 8 a.m. It wasn't the frantic pounding of a bill collector, but 3 slow, heavy thuds that vibrated through the floorboards. Maria wiped her flour-dusted hands on her apron and opened the door, her heart hammering against her ribs. Roger Smith stood in her narrow hallway, looking entirely too large for the space. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo today, but a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her catering van. His presence was in physical weight, an invisible pressure that made the air feel thin and electric. Behind him, 2 massive men in dark glasses stood like stone gargoyles. "Mr. Smith," Maria gasped, her voice cracking. I'm still working on the apology letter. And the insurance details for the suit. I promise I'll pay for the cleaning or the replacement even if it takes me 10 years. Roger stepped over the threshold without waiting for an invitation. He didn't look at the peeling wallpaper or the toys scattered on the rug. His amber eyes were fixed solely on her, tracking the frantic pulse in her throat with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He reached into his inner pocket and pulled out a heavy, cream-colored folder, tossing it onto her laminate kitchen table. "Cleaning won't fix it, Maria," he rumbled, his voice like low thunder. "That shirt was a custom weave from Milan. It's gone. And I don't want your money." Maria blinked, her confusion momentarily overriding her fear. "Then what do you want? If you're here to sue me." "I'm here to offer you a way out of the debt," Roger interrupted. He leaned down, his face inches from hers, and for a second she saw that strange, predatory glow flicker in his eyes again. "My personal chef resigned this morning. Apparently he couldn't handle the heat. You, however, seem to thrive on it." He flipped open the folder. It wasn't a lawsuit, it was an ironclad employment contract. The salary listed at the bottom was enough to pay off her debts, secure the girls' college funds, and move them out of this neighborhood in a month. "Reparation," he whispered, the word sounding more like a command than a suggestion. "You work for me. You cook for me. You belong in my kitchen until the debt is settled. Do we have a deal, or do I let my lawyers handle the incident from last night?" Maria looked at the contract, then at the man who felt less like a billionaire and more like a wolf waiting for his prey to stop running. She had no choice and they both knew it. She reached for the pen, her hand brushing his, and a jolt of pure white-hot lightning sparked between them. Roger smirked, a dark, victorious flash of teeth. The trap was set. The heavy iron gates of the Smith estate hissed shut behind Maria's catering van, leaving her in the sudden eerie silence of the tree-lined suburban street. The sun was dipping below the horizon, bleeding a bruised purple across the sky. Her first day in Roger's kitchen had been a blur of high-end stainless steel and the man's suffocating magnetic presence. She just wanted to get home, kiss the twins, and scrub the scent of expensive spices and Alpha King from her skin. She pulled over 2 blocks away to check a rattling sound in the back of the van, but as she stepped onto the pavement, a shadow detached itself from a dark SUV parked under a dying street lamp. "Going up in the world, aren't you, Maria?" The voice was like a cold slime down her spine. Maria froze, her hand tightening on the van's door handle. Out of the darkness stepped Julian, the man who had spent 3 years systematically trying to dismantle her spirit before she finally gathered the courage to run. He looked the same, perfectly groomed, wearing a smile that never reached his cold, calculating eyes. "Julian," she whispered, her heart transitioning from a steady beat to a frantic hammer. "You're breaking the restraining order. Get away from me." Julian laughed, a sharp, jagged sound. He didn't move back, he moved closer, invading her personal space until she could smell his familiar, cloying cologne. The law is for people who can't afford to bend it, sweetheart. I've been watching you. I saw you at the gala. I saw you go into that fortress today. You're working for Roger Smith now. It's just a job to pay off a debt, Maria snapped, trying to push past him. He caught her arm, his fingers digging into her skin with a familiar, bruising force. It's an opportunity. Smith is a ghost. No one can get close to his private servers or his biometric data. But you're in his kitchen. You're in his house. He leaned down, his voice dropping to a venomous hiss. I need his encrypted trade files. If you don't get them for me, I'll have a CPS worker at your door by Monday morning. I've already documented your unstable work hours and your lack of childcare. I'll take the girls, Maria. And you know I have the friends in high places to make sure you never see them again. The world seemed to tilt. The thought of Julian's hands on her daughters made her stomach turn. He'll kill me if he catches me, she breathed. And I'll destroy you if you don't, Julian countered, releasing her arm with a final shove. You have 1 week to get me the drive. Don't test me. I'm always watching. He disappeared back into the shadows of the SUV, the engine turning over with a low growl. Maria leaned against her van, gasping for air. She was caught between a human monster she knew all too well and a supernatural king she was only beginning to understand. Either way, the fire was rising and she was right in the center of the burn. The Smith estate was less of a home and more of a fortress carved from glass and cold stone, perched high above the city like a hawk's nest. For Maria, the transition into Roger's world was a sensory assault. Every morning she arrived with her twin girls in tow. Roger had insisted, claiming he wouldn't have his chef distracted by childcare woes. And every morning the house seemed to breathe with a life of its own. Working in the kitchen was unlike any catering gig she'd ever had. The pantry was stocked with the finest ingredients, but Roger's personal requests were unsettling. He ignored the delicate consommes and roasted vegetables she prepared for the household staff. Instead, he demanded his steaks blue, barely seared, the center still cool and crimson, and he consumed them with a primal efficiency that made Maria's breath hitch. She once walked in on him eating a tray of sashimi-grade venison. No salt, no oil, just the raw protein. He hadn't heard her enter, or so she thought, until he spoke without turning around. You're wearing a new lavender detergent, Maria. It's a bit loud for this early in the morning. She froze, her hand still on the door handle. He was 20 feet away, his back to her, yet he had detected a scent change she hadn't even consciously realized she'd made. His senses were impossible. He could hear a glass shatter in the west wing from the basement gym. He could track her movement through the house without ever looking up from his tablet. But it was his treatment of the twins that truly threw her. She had expected a man like Roger Smith to find two energetic 4-year-olds a nuisance. Instead, he treated them with a terrifyingly soft reverence. He had a playroom outfitted with toys that cost more than Maria's van within 48 hours of their arrival. He didn't play with them like a normal adult. He watched them with the protective, intense gaze of a shepherd guarding lambs. They have the scent of the forest on them today, Roger remarked one afternoon, crouching down to eye level with little Lily. He didn't flinch when she smeared a sticky, glitter-covered hand across his pristine charcoal sleeve. Instead, he caught her tiny hand in his massive one, his thumb tracing her palm with a tenderness that sent a shiver of fear and longing through Maria. They are safe here, Maria, he said, his amber eyes lifting to find hers across the kitchen island. The air grew heavy, thick with that undeniable magnetic pull. In this house, what is mine is protected. And since they belong to you, they belong to the pack. Maria gripped the edge of the counter, Julian's threats echoing in her mind. She was living in a king's den, surrounded by a luxury that felt like a gilded cage, and she was starting to realize that the man protecting her daughters might be more dangerous than the man threatening them. The morning air was thick with the smell of burnt rubber and spilled oil. Maria stood in the gravel lot of the local garage, staring in disbelief at the shredded remains of her catering van's tires. It wasn't just a puncture. The sidewalls had been systematically flayed, and the engine block was weeping a dark, iridescent fluid that signaled total sabotage. Julian's warning from the night before echoed in her mind, a cold promise kept. "I told you, lady, this wasn't no accident," the head mechanic said, wiping grease onto a rag as he gestured to the jagged cuts. "Someone wanted you off the road. Permanently." Maria felt the walls closing in. Without the van, she couldn't fulfill her small side contracts, and without those, she was entirely dependent on the man in the glass fortress. She reached for her phone, her fingers trembling, but a low, rhythmic thrumming in the distance made the gravel beneath her feet vibrate. A fleet of black SUVs pulled into the lot, kicking up a cloud of dust that tasted of iron and expensive gasoline. The lead vehicle hadn't even fully stopped before the door flung open. Roger Smith stepped out, his presence so massive and focused that the mechanics instinctively backed away. He wasn't wearing a suit today. He was in a black tactical shirt that strained against his shoulders. His amber eyes scanned the scene with a terrifying, predatory speed. He didn't look at the van. He went straight to Maria, his hands catching her face with a gentleness that contradicted the storm brewing in his expression. "Who did this?" he growled, the sound vibrating through her skull. "Roger, you shouldn't be here," Maria whispered, glancing at the gawking mechanics. "I can handle it. I'll just call a tow." "You'll handle nothing," Roger interrupted, his voice dropping into a register that made the hair on her arms stand up. He turned toward the garage crew, his arms sliding around Maria's waist and pulling her flush against his side. It wasn't a comforting hug. It was a claim. He anchored her to him as if he were marking his territory in front of the world. "Listen closely," Roger said to the mechanics, his voice carrying the weight of a king's decree. "This woman, this vehicle, and everything she touches is under my protection. If so much as a shadow falls on her again, I won't be calling the police. I'll be coming back myself." One of the mechanics started to protest, but Roger stepped forward, his eyes flashing a molten, supernatural gold that silenced the entire lot. He reached into his pocket, tossed a thick stack of bills onto the workbench and hauled Maria toward his SUV. "You're not going back to that apartment tonight," he muttered, his grip possessive and unyielding as he threw open the passenger door. "Roger, you're scaring me," she breathed, even as a traitorous thrill raced through her veins. "Good," he rasped, leaning over her until she was pinned against the leather seat. "Then you understand the stakes. You're mine now, Maria. And I don't let anyone break what belongs to me." The high-tech gym in the basement of the Smith estate smelled of ozone and heavy iron. Maria had come down to bring Roger a high-protein recovery smoothie, but she stopped in the doorway, mesmerized. He was moving with a fluid, terrifying grace against a heavy bag that looked like it was made of reinforced leather. Each strike sounded like a whip cracking, a display of raw power that made the air in the room vibrate. He caught her scent before she could speak. He spun, his movements too fast for a human, and in his haste to stop his momentum, his shoulder hooked a jagged piece of a broken training rack. There was a sharp, biting sound of fabric yielding. The expensive compression shirt he wore didn't just tear. It shredded, hanging in ruined strips from his frame. Maria set the glass down on a bench, her eyes widening. She had seen his chest at the gala, but in the harsh, unforgiving LED lights of the gym, the truth was far more brutal. His skin was a roadmap of violence. Jagged white lines intersected across his ribs, and a deep, puckered starburst mark sat right over his heart. "You're bleeding," she whispered, stepping closer despite the instinct screaming at her to run. Roger looked down at the fresh graze on his shoulder, then back at her, his amber eyes dimming to a somber gold. He didn't reach for a towel to cover himself. Instead, he stood tall, allowing her to see the damage. "These aren't from boardrooms, Maria," he rumbled, his voice gravelly and low. He traced the long scar that ran from his collarbone to his hip. "This was from a silverback in the Pacific Northwest who thought I was too young to lead." This one, he pointed to the starburst near his heart, was a hunter's bolt. Wolf's bane tipped. It was meant to be the end of the Smith line. Maria reached out, her fingers hovering just inches from his skin. The heat radiating from him was intense, like a furnace left open. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to know what kind of world you've walked into," Roger said, catching her hand and pressing her palm flat against the jagged scar over his heart. Her skin buzzed with a static charge. "Being the Alpha King isn't about the money or the cars. It's about being the strongest monster in the dark so the rest of the pack can sleep. My history is written in blood, Maria. And Julian? He's a scavenger. He's a coyote trying to nip at a lion." He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers, his breath hot against her lips. "I've burned for a long time, but I've never felt a heat like the one you brought into my house. Don't fear the scars. Fear the man who gave them to me, because he's no longer breathing. And anyone who tries to add to this collection by hurting you will share his fate." The afternoon sun was deceptively peaceful as Maria pulled her new Smith-issued SUV into the preschool parking lot. But as she stepped out, the air felt wrong, too heavy, too still, like the moments before a lightning strike. Her maternal instinct screamed just as she spotted Julian's dark sedan idling near the playground fence. Julian wasn't alone. 2 burly men in tactical jackets were already unlatching the gate, moving toward the twins with a predatory focus. Maria's heart didn't just drop, it stopped. "Lily. Rose. Run," she shrieked, her voice tearing through the quiet afternoon. Julian stepped out of his car, his face twisted in a smug, desperate grin. "I told you I'd take them, Maria. If you won't play ball, I'll find someone who—" He never finished the sentence. From the shadows of the oak trees lining the perimeter, 3 figures moved. They didn't run, they blurred. It was a terrifying, liquid motion that defied human physics. Roger's security team, the men Maria had seen standing like statues in the foyer, were suddenly a wall of muscle and bone between the twins and the kidnappers. The tallest guard, a man named Silas, didn't use a weapon. He hit Julian's lead henchman with a force that sounded like a car crash, sending the man flying 15 feet back into the brick school sign. The second guard moved with a low, guttural growl, his eyes flashing that same predatory amber Maria had seen in Roger's study. He caught the second man by the throat, lifting him off the ground with a single hand as if he weighed nothing. Julian's smugness vanished, replaced by a primal, shaking terror. He scrambled back toward his car, but he didn't get far. The gravel crunched behind him and Roger Smith stepped out of the midday glare. He looked like a god of war in a tailored suit. He didn't say a word. He simply grabbed the car door as Julian tried to pull it shut and ripped it off its hinges. The screech of tearing metal was the only sound in the lot. Roger reached in, hauled Julian out by his tie and pinned him against the frame of the car. The Alpha King's face was a mask of cold, lethal fury. "You made a mistake," Roger rumbled, his voice vibrating with a frequency that made the windows of the school rattle. "You touched what belongs to the king." Maria scooped her trembling daughters into her arms, burying her face in their hair as Roger's men formed a protective circle around them. She looked up just as Roger turned his head. For a fleeting second, his face was feral, his teeth too sharp, his eyes too bright. But as his gaze landed on Maria, the monster receded. "Get them in the car," Roger commanded his men, his voice softening only for her. "They are safe now. I'm going to ensure this shadow never darkens your door again." As Silas ushered them away, Maria looked back to see Roger leaning into Julian's space, his shadow stretching long and monstrous across the pavement. The hunt was over and the execution had begun. The storm that had been brewing in Roger's eyes for weeks finally broke in the dead of night. Maria was pulled from sleep by a sound that wasn't human. A low, rhythmic thrumming that vibrated through the floorboards of the estate like a malfunctioning engine. Shivering in her silk robe, she followed the sound toward the heavy oak doors of Roger's private study. The scent hit her first, cedar, ozone, and the metallic tang of raw power. She pushed the door open, the hinges groaning in the silence. The room was a wreck. A mahogany bookshelf had been splintered as if hit by a sledgehammer, and the leather armchair was shredded to ribbons. In the center of the carnage, Roger was on his knees. His back was arched, the muscles in his shoulders rippling and distending in ways that defied anatomy. His shirt was once again a casualty, hanging in tatters around his waist, revealing skin that was glowing with an unnatural, feverish heat. "Roger," Maria whispered, her voice trembling. He whipped his head around and Maria gasped. His face was a shifting mask of man and beast. His jaw had lengthened, his teeth were serrated ivory, and his eyes were no longer amber. They were two orbs of molten liquid gold that burned with a terrifying feral hunger. A guttural snarl ripped from his throat, a warning that made every instinct in her body scream to run. But she didn't run. She saw the way his claws dug into the hardwood floor, the way his body shuddered with the effort of holding back the transformation. He wasn't a monster attacking. He was a man drowning in his own skin. "Get out," he rasped, the words sounding like grinding stones. "No," Maria said, her voice steadier now. She crossed the room, stepping over the debris. She ignored the way his hackles rose as she knelt in front of him. "You told me your pack is protected here. I'm part of that pack, aren't I?" She reached out, her cool hand landing against his burning, fever-slicked chest. The moment her skin touched his, a jolt of static electricity surged through her arm. Roger let out a choked sound, his head falling back as he leaned into her touch. Maria placed her other hand over his heart, feeling the frantic, heavy gallop of a beast trying to break free. She didn't pull away. She leaned in, pressing her forehead against his hot, sweating brow, whispering nonsense words of comfort, letting her own calm pulse act as an anchor for his chaos. Slowly, the vibration in the room began to fade. The golden glow in his eyes receded, replaced by the weary gray of a man who had been fighting a war for centuries. The claws retracted and his breathing leveled out. Roger slumped forward, his heavy head resting on Maria's shoulder, his arms winding around her waist in a grip that was desperate and possessive. "You should be afraid of me," he breathed against her neck, his voice finally human again. "I've lived with real monsters, Roger," she whispered, stroking the nape of his neck. "You're just a king with a heavy crown. And I'm not going anywhere." The grand crystal ballroom was a kaleidoscope of shimmering gold and lethal intentions. Maria stood at the center of the gala, the very place where she had first set Roger on fire. Tonight, she wore a gown the color of molten copper, her spine straight and her eyes clear. In her clutch rested the encrypted drive Julian so desperately craved, or so he thought. She caught his reflection in a champagne flute before she felt his presence. Julian stepped out from behind a velvet curtain, his face a mask of oily triumph. "The drive, Maria. No. Or the paperwork for the custody hearing goes live in 10 minutes. "I have it," Maria whispered, her voice steady. She led him toward the darkened balcony, away from the prying eyes of the socialites. As they stepped into the cool night air, she turned, holding out the small silver device. "Take it and leave my family alone." Julian snatched the drive, his fingers grazing hers with a coldness that no longer made her flinch. "You were always so easy to break," he sneered, plugging the drive into a handheld reader. His smile died instantly as the screen flashed a single image. A stylized wolf's head, the crest of the Alpha King. "What is this?" "A tracking beacon," a voice rumbled from the shadows. Roger Smith stepped into the moonlight, and the air temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. He didn't look like a billionaire tonight. He looked like a predator that had finally finished the hunt. Julian scrambled back, hitting the stone railing. "Smith, stay back. I have rights." "You have nothing," Roger growled, his eyes bleeding into that terrifying supernatural gold. He didn't use his fists. He simply stepped into Julian's space, the sheer pressure of his aura forcing the smaller man to his knees. Roger reached out and crushed the reader in his bare hand, the metal shrieking as it flattened like paper. I told you that what belongs to the king is protected. You threaten my mate. You threaten my pups. Roger leaned down, his voice a vibrating snarl that made the balcony stones tremble. You will leave this city tonight. You will sign over every right, every claim and every memory of Maria Bland. If I ever catch your scent within 100 miles of my pack again, they won't find enough of you to bury. Julian didn't argue. He broke, sobbing as he signed the digital documents Roger's silhouetted security team held out. When he fled into the night, he did so like a beaten dog. Roger turned to Maria, the feral tension leaving his shoulders. He reached out, his massive hand cupping her cheek. It's over, Maria. The fire is out. No, Maria whispered, stepping into his heat and wrapping her arms around his scarred, powerful chest. She looked up at her alpha king, the man who was both her protector and her greatest thrill. The fire is just getting started. Behind them, the twins peered through the glass doors, guarded by a pack that would move mountains for them. The contract was no longer about debt. It was about destiny. The alpha had his queen and the pack was finally whole. If you enjoyed this story, click on the subscribe button, like and comment. See another interesting video here.